Hi, my name is Rachel Ward, and this is my graduate research project for Amberton University. This is for the Human Resource Management class with Dr. Diane Sanchez. Project objectives. The purpose of this project is to discuss how diverse teams bring more creative ideas to the workplace. We will be looking at how team diversity affects the nonprofit sector. The following topics will be covered during this presentation: diversity in the workplace, the hypothesis and methodology used for this project, a literary review with limitations. We'll take a look at nonprofit teams and the implications that diversity in teams in the nonprofit sector have for the 21st century. What is workplace diversity? It can include race, ethnicity, gender, age, disability, language, education, socioeconomic background, education, military service, religion, or sexual orientation. There are several categories of diversity that are actually protected by the federal government: race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, and age. Next, I'm going to give a brief background of the protections that are put in place by the federal government regarding encouraging diversity and discouraging discrimination. The Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 protects employees and job applicants from discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. The Equal Pay Act of 1963 protects men and women from any sex-based wage discrimination in payment of wages, and if they're doing equal work, they're expected to have equal pay. The Age Discrimination in Employment Act of 1967 protects employees from being discriminated against because of age. It specifically protects people 40 years and older. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973 protects job applicants from discrimination based on disability. And the Civil Rights Act of 1991 amends Title VII to improve recovery and compensatory damages if discrimination is found. Moving beyond just what is expected by the federal government and legally what organizations have to do, this project is going to look at the benefits of diversity, especially team diversity. The hypothesis statement for this project is: when diverse teams exist in nonprofit organizations, employees feel empowered to share creative ideas that can empower their workplace and the organization as a whole. The methodology for this project is qualitative analysis based on literary reviews from several peer-reviewed sources. The first study we're going to look at that explores how diversity and team creativity are linked is called Diversity and Team Creativity: Exploring Underlying Mechanisms. The objective of this study aimed to show that when diverse teams are assembled, if members have a sense of team inclusion, yet are free to express their diverse identity, they're more likely to share unique ideas from their perspective, which fosters a greater level of creativity within the group. The study hypothesized that there are two factors needed for new creative ideas to be generated within a diverse team. First, members needed to have a strong sense of their racial ethnic identity, while simultaneously having a strong sense of team identity. The first study we'll look at is called Diversity and Team Creativity: Exploring Underlying Mechanisms. The methodology used in this study was a robust literature review, a sample of full-time students at a university in the southeastern United States, and this included 204 undergraduates. They were given a questionnaire before assembling the teams and determined the ratio-ethnic background of each participant. The study also included a laboratory experiment where teams were assembled using manipulations such as ratio-ethnic identity and superordinate team salience. The teams were distributed into groups of 4, and in each group of 4, there were 2 participants with the same ratio-ethnic background. The teams were tasked with coming up with a slogan. The slogan was to be designed and created for an advertising campaign to recruit volunteers for war reconstruction efforts in a racially and ethnically diverse population. After the slogans were completed, a survey was administered to raters that were outside of the study. They were given a 6-point Likert scale and were to measure how creative each slogan was. The recommendations from this study are based on the surveys that were sent out to the raters that rated how creative the slogans were, as well as a questionnaire that was given to the participants as they were leaving the study. The questionnaire asked how they felt how they related to their team as a whole, how they saw the team identity, and also how they felt they were connected to the ratio-ethnic subgroup within their team, because that seemed to affect the creativity of their answers as well. What was found in the study was that new and creative ideas were highest within groups when both the ratio-ethnic subgroup and the superordinate team identity were both strong. The study also showed that the key to high levels of team creativity was to enable the diverse team members to express their differences while simultaneously encouraging them to also define them in terms of the larger team itself. Both those had to be present for a high level of creativity. The limitations to the study were that the researchers were not able to conduct a supplementary analysis to show how the dyadic pairs within the groups of 4, how the minority pairs differentiated with each other. There needs to be further study on that. Another limitation is, for the purpose of this study, the researchers asked participants to identify themselves by ratio-ethnic background, and they were paired in groups accordingly. This portion of the study can't really be replicated or exactly applied to a work setting, because to purposely bring attention to an individual based on their race wouldn't be appropriate in the workplace. The next study I will look at is called Effects of Diversity on Knowledge Sharing and Creativity of Work Teams. Status differential among members as a facilitator. The objective of this study is to examine the correlations between diversity and knowledge sharing and team creativity within work teams. The study investigates the difference between group members in the areas of education, functional background, and tenure. The study also looks at the effects of a high status differential within work teams. This study was conducted in North Korea, and the cultural considerations for this study is the high power distance that Korea has. The reason the study wanted to include the status differential is because that comes into play in the Korean culture. A high power distance score shows low tolerance for social inequality and differences between levels in organizations. The reason I wanted to include this in my study is because many times nonprofit teams will be working on a global level. And so when assembling work teams for creativity, It needs to be taken into consideration that different cultures will see work teams differently. The methodology used in this study was a literature review, data collection, questionnaires using a 6-point Likert scale rating system. The Likert scale was administered to a sample population of 168 managers that were enrolled in an MBA program in a South Korean university. The recommendations of the study were that functional background diversity had an effect on team creativity by shaping group processes such as knowledge sharing. Diversity in function, age, and tenure brought a broad range of cognitive and knowledge benefits within the group. Group members with different functions had different roles and were more apt to share, especially regarding their expertise. They shared the knowledge they had, and that was shown to especially be prevalent when they understood their place within the group. The status differential within the group is often seen as negative, especially in the United States, where there's a low tolerance for power differential. It can be seen as having the tendency to suppress and undermine certain members. However, in South Korea, where there's a high power distance within their culture and workplace, it has to be addressed in work teams. The study found that when status differential was established, it actually encouraged knowledge sharing because there's a high tolerance for that within Asian countries, and it's just understood. And if group members were afraid to share because of the power distance, when their role was established within the team, they were more apt to share. They needed that distinction of who was the subject matter expert on what topic and what their role was before they felt comfortable sharing in the group setting, where a power differential was evident. This may have the opposite effect in other cultures where there's a low tolerance for a power differential. But when working with other cultures, it's important for nonprofit organizations to understand when assembling teams, there may be cultural differences. There were limitations in this study. The first limitation was that the study had a low number of women that were participating. Only 29.2% in the study were women. The study results may have been quite different had there been more women included. Another limitation of the study was that status differential for participants was self-reported and not verified by a secondary source. In following studies, it may be a good idea for researchers to check on what was reported with managers and verify that with another source. The third limitation was that all participants were from South Korea. The study could be repeated in a culturally different setting to determine how the results would be different. As we stated before, South Korea has a high power distance tolerance. If this same study were conducted in the United States with a low power distance tolerance, it could have very different results. So why are diverse teams that bring creative ideas important to nonprofits? Well, creativity is something that's very important to companies. It brings innovation. Innovation is an employee's ability to reach a solution to complex situations or problems within the organization. Innovation gives companies a competitive edge. It also encourages team-oriented collaborations. Development of new products and services. In today's market, when technology is constantly changing, it's so important to have an innovative work staff. Creativity and innovation promote new knowledge, new technologies, and new business models. Nonprofits, though they're nonprofit, are still competing in the competitive market, and it's important to have a cutting edge with practices that promote creativity, including diverse work teams. Now we'll take a look at nonprofit organizations and specifically look at how diverse work teams are important within the nonprofit. Diversity matters in nonprofit teams, especially in leadership and board team membership. Studies have found that group heterogeneity produces creative behavior and innovative ideas through human capital. Having diverse leadership in teams is an essential part of making effective decisions, especially for minority clients, which many nonprofit organizations serve. A diverse board and diverse management teams are better able to serve their clientele. Nonprofit boards with a significant number of female group leaders were also found to be more focused on the mission and vision of the organization than boards that were male-dominated. The male-dominated boards were found to have more restrictions based on financial constraints, where women were able to see beyond that. Now we'll look at a nonprofit organization called World Vision. World Vision is a Christian nonprofit that seeks to help the poor and oppressed in communities all over the world. Their mission is to transform communities by assisting with community-based sustainable efforts that provide the poor in communities with the basics: food, water, clothing, and education. They're especially focused on children's needs. They also assist with emergency relief. They help communities during conflict and disaster. They're funded by partnering with churches and individuals that sponsor children. Another mission they have is to promote justice. World Vision aims to work to change unjust structures within the communities they serve. World Vision consists of multicultural and multinational teams all over the world. But World Vision's president, Edgar Sandoval, believes that they can improve on their diversity measures and take measures to ensure that it continues. One thing they're doing for their employees is incorporating a chapel service honoring heritage. Something that they have in their organization is a chapel service, so they're incorporating honoring the different members of their work community in that way. He's also planned to implement diversity and recruitment efforts within the organization. He's going to track how they're doing by expanding race and ethnicity demographic measurements on the staff's annual survey. He's also decided to incorporate workplace training for top managers on how to use diverse training strategies. The first step to having diverse teams is to have a diverse workforce. So World Vision is taking the first step in creating a diverse workspace that includes diverse teams by ensuring that their hiring practices and practices within the company after employees are already there incorporate diversity. That concludes my presentation. These are the references I used on my project.